from PLOS, Public Library of Science, and I'm one of the co-chairs for today. What I will do is I'll quickly introduce them now. So the co-chairs, we have 4 out of 5 co-chairs here. We've got Rebecca Grant, we've got Natasha Simons and Simon Gowdy as well, all performing various essential functions to make sure the rest of this session goes as well as possible. So as a reminder, please introduce yourself, mute your microphone if you're not presenting or asking a question. If you're online, please use the raise hand or chat function to ask your questions. Of course, stay fair, be present and be respectful of everybody else in the meeting. Session is being recorded and those will be available online in the platform soon. And if you are not comfortable with showing yourself on the meeting, then just mute your microphone and turn off your camera. Okie dokie. So we have 3 relatively short presentations and then some time for discussion at the end. I will not read through these for purposes of time. We'll hear all about the presenters and the specific sessions right before they happen. We have a very small number of slides of introduction today. We're not going to give you the history of our group on for this session. That was never the plan anyway, despite the slight reduction in time that we have. But we do have collaborative session notes. Those are in the chat on the Wova platform. There's an attendee register. Please do leave your name and email address there and contribute to the notes if you are so inclined. Okay, so this group has quite a long name, but essentially it's the data policy group. We've been working on data policy, standardization and harmonization for about 5 years now. We've had a particularly strong focus on journal data policies, and one of the main outputs of this group, and thank you everybody who contributed to its development, is a framework of journal policies which includes 14 standard features of journal research data policies arranged across 6 different types or tiers or levels of policy, which have an increasing number of features and an increasing level of stringency as one moves from the first policy through to the 6th policy. And we will have observed much progress in publisher development and implementation of policies in the last few years. Now, what we're talking about today is one particular feature of journal research data policies, and that's the one highlighted here, and that is data availability statements. So specific, ideally clear and concise statements about if, where and how research data supporting published papers can be found, and we'll look at many more examples as the meeting goes on. But a quick bit of context is if like me, you like to search for papers with data availability statements, there is actually a very neat feature in the PubMed Central bibliographic database where you can actually find them. And in the last 5 years, there has been nearly 1 million papers, or have been nearly 1 million papers published with data availability statements. There's actually more than 1 million papers just in PubMed Central now that have data availability statements, and that's really fantastic progress. Right-hand side of this slide, really just to call out that numerous publishers, all of the big 5 publishers and many other publishers besides, have been participating in research data related activities, which no doubt has contributed to that increase in quantity of data policies and data availability statements. But the problem that we really want to explore today is how do we move from quantity to quality? We know that data availability statements, DAS, can support data discovery and data reuse for researchers, for readers. We have observed that they support cultural change around data sharing, and they can also play a specific role for funders and institutions who might wish to better understand researchers' data sharing practices and to understand the effectiveness of policies on research data sharing. However, we do see that suboptimal or poor DAS are quite pervasive. We often see generic statements of available on request or data that are available in the paper, which may be a good sign in terms of engaging with data policies and providing some response to that data policy, but those very simple statements with no information about specific data sets or files do limit their utility for readers, for funders, and for institutions who might be interested in the outcomes of policies. And to begin to highlight this issue, the quality of data availability statements is a concern for funding agencies in particular. And a meeting was convened last month, which emerged from discussions within the RDA, and it involved a number of funding agencies, including the NIH, JST in Japan, and AMED in Japan, Cancer Research UK, the UKRI, the European Research Council, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and the Wellcome Trust. And we had a lot of deep discussions about data policies and data availability statements, but a really key theme that came out of those discussions was that the quality of data availability statements might be limiting their wider uptake and utility and support from certain funding agencies. And so, continuing that theme, we have a representative of a funding agency, Aki McFarlane, Open Research Specialist at the Wellcome Trust, and she is going to give you a short presentation giving the Wellcome Trust funder perspective on challenges, opportunities of data availability statements. And Aki, I can drive your slides if you would like.
Yes, I think that would be safest tech-wise. I never managed to share my screen properly.
Okay, I will mute my audio, and then whenever you're ready, get going, and I will drive the slides for you. Thanks, Aki.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, thank you for the introduction, Ian. I thought also for the benefit of anyone who isn't familiar with Wellcome, I would just give a quick overview of us as a charitable foundation based in the UK with the mission of improving health for everyone through research. We fund probably majority into the UK, but we do also fund a significant amount into lower middle income countries, and in some cases into other countries in the world. So that's our sort of global remit. And yes, Ian, if you could move on one slide, that'd be great. Yeah, we at Wellcome, we do have an extensive data sharing policy, but we're here talking about data availability statements in particular, and actually that appears in our open access to publications policy. Since 2016, we've had the requirement for all research articles that are supported in whole or in part by Wellcome, they must include a statement explaining how other researchers can access any data, original software, or materials underpinning the research. And after a few years of having that in our policy, in 2020, we commissioned an organization, RDA, to study the data availability in Wellcome-funded articles, making a comparison between the baseline of 2016, just sort of before the policy, that part of the policy came into effect, and then 2019. And there were about 18,000 total articles included in that analysis. And on the left of the screen here, I have the citation for the RDA publication, which describes the methods and the results of that study. Next slide, please. And sort of the headline findings here. Between 2016 and 2019, yes, the amount of articles with data availability statements increased. Great, wonderful to see some policy compliance. Obviously, as you can see, it's not brilliant, but getting there. But interesting to see actually that the indications that the data was shared sort of in repositories or other platforms, which would be our preference, didn't really change at all. So slightly disappointing there. Next slide digs into the findings a little bit more. Yeah, the question being, has the effective sharing of data actually increased with the inclusion of data availability statements? And if you could advance again, Ian. You see at the bottom here, sorry, I think the formatting is slightly cutting off the actual digits there on the slide on my screen. I hope it's okay for everyone else. But you see that overall, the availability of data increases. The percentage where the data was not available from either the data availability statement or the materials and methods sections of all the articles analysed. I've lost the beginning of my sentence. Anyway, the amount where there was data not available decreased, which is great. If you could advance one more time, Ian. However, something that rankles with me is, as Ian has already mentioned, the category of statement that says data available on request, and that did increase between the 2 years, which sort of it raises a number of concerns. Next slide. My main concern that a lot of people share, I know, is, does that statement, data available upon reasonable request, really mean that the data is actually available? And you may well have seen this recent study of articles published by Biomed Central during January 2019, which showed a rather sad sort of 6.8% of those articles which included the statement data available on reasonable request, only 6.8% actually provided said data upon a reasonable request, which is quite poor. Yeah, it does raise questions. You know, I'm not sure if this article dives into the reasons behind that, but I have many speculations. And next slide. There's also sort of other philosophical issues, I think, with using this statement available on reasonable request, not least, what is a reasonable request? Do some researchers get preferential access, those who are senior or well-known or already known to the author, in which case we sort of perpetuate inequities that we know are already present in research by using this statement. And also, it's not usually very transparent kind of how your reasonable request is assessed. What's the criteria used to accept or decline, and who actually is making the decision, which again can put off some people who might otherwise have attempted to access data if it were just available through a click in a repository. So next slide, please. Yeah, just to conclude, yes, we're pleased to see some increase in transparency around data availability in the recent years, not just in Wellcome research, but in general as well. So that's great, as well as overall increases in data sharing, also great. But at Wellcome, for sure, we would like to see more research data being shared and in more equitable, accessible, and the dream, reusable ways. And yeah, one more slide, please, Ian. I did publish a sort of wish list for publishers around data availability statements earlier this year as well. I've just copied out the don't want to say demands, requests that I had there. Many of which I'm sure you're all on board with in this group already, but number 3 there, I think relevant to what I've been talking about today. I've just added in an extra qualifier. If the data availability statement has to be that the data is available on request, is it possible to, you know, for the publisher to request further information on how that request for data access will be assessed? Because I think that's better than nothing. And I recognize it may be a bit soon to just ban the use of data available upon reasonable request, however much I might like to do that. And I can see a couple of the other things I have on this list are going to come up in the other talks. So I think I will leave it at that. And thank you very much for listening to me on my soapbox, and looking forward to the rest of the discussions.
Thank you, Aki. Does anyone have one burning question for Aki about her presentation, or anything else from that they'd like to ask Aki before we move on to the next presentation? Just looking around to see if I can see any hands raised on the.
I will be around, so if anyone wants to drop anything in either of the chats later, I can pick up there.
Yep. Okay. I think we'll move on in that case. And next we have a pre-recorded presentation. And Rebecca, would you like me to stop sharing, and are you then able to drive?
Yeah. So as I get this set up, give me one moment. I was just going to say, in relation to Aki's presentation, I'm hoping that we'll address some of the points that she made if we have time in the interactive session, because I also think there are improvements that can be made if we do allow data available on request. I think we could certainly be asking authors to provide a bit more information. Okay. I'm a bit skeptical that this is going to work. Let me see. I think I'm going to have to do this differently to how we did it last time, Ian. Okay. I'm just going to try and get this up in a tab and then share that tab, and we'll see, does that work? Okay. Sorry, everyone. It wouldn't be an online meeting without many technical difficulties. Okay.
We can see something now, Rebecca.
So hello, everybody. My name is Leo Tederson. I'm a research professor representing the Estonian Young Academy of Sciences and also University of Tartu Mycology and Microbiology Center. My presentation today is about data availability upon request and whether or not it works. So data sharing itself is the basis of scientific approach and also ethics of science. Different research fields generate very different types of data, and these may include
I think we just lost the recording, Rebecca.
Sorry, I'll get that started again. It's very hard to navigate around the screens when you're sharing something on one of the other ones. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Current tab.
There are also multiple ways of data sharing, which have been elaborated in times of publishing. First of all, there are freely accessible databases. Researchers can publish their data in supplementary materials or institutional homepages, but also some data are published in difficult to access commercial databases or are indicated as available upon request. In this figure to the right, you can see that different data types prevail in 9 different fields of research. Blue bars are data sets, purple bars are images and videos, and black bars are models. Since we have all used to using data of some other persons, or some other people have requested our data, together with the Estonian Young Academy of Science colleagues, we decided to establish a specific case study. We set the following hypothesis. First, data sharing practices differ among research fields. Second, data sharing has improved more recently. Third, data availability upon request is not a particularly suitable model. And fourth, we hypothesized that there may be a best before effect, especially for data shared upon request. For methods, we considered 2 journals, Nature and Science magazines, which are the top journals and particularly interdisciplinary journals. According to our expertise of our team, we selected 9 disciplines, which are biomaterials and biotechnology, ecology, forestry, humanities combined, materials and energy catalysis, microbiology, optics and photonics, psychology, and social sciences. We selected 2 10-year periods from the year 2000 to 2009 versus 2010 to 2019. For interpretation, we selected the most critical results or data set from each of the articles. So altogether, we analyzed nearly 900 research papers in these 2 journals. First, we checked for data availability of these most critical results. If the data were fully or only, if the data were unavailable or only partly available, we contacted the authors and sent reminders after 2 weeks and after 4 weeks. So here on the slide, you can also see how researchers in different disciplines prefer to share their data. So it is mostly in the form of text, including supplementary materials in the journal's homepage, or sometimes nothing is declared, as in the field of psychology. And in many fields like forestry and materials, for ecology, for energy and catalysis, the data availability is mostly upon request. We found out that indeed data sharing practices do differ among research fields and journals. The situation is relatively good in the combined field of humanities. It is mediocre in the fields of microbiology and ecology, for example, but it is not that good in materials for energy and catalysis, psychology, and social sciences. However, data sharing has improved in recent decades, and especially in the recent 5 years. But this improvement depends on discipline. For example, in the field of microbiology, the tendency is actually becoming worse, especially regarding large metabarcoding and metagenomics datasets. We also found that data availability upon request to the author is not a suitable model. First of all, it takes a lot of communication with the authors. Usually it takes more than 2 weeks on average, and it requires at least one reminder to obtain the data. When communicating or attempting to communicate with the authors, there is an enormous amount of ignorance, meaning that the authors simply do not respond to you. This is especially common behavior among ecologists and forest scientists. There is also commonly a lot of refusal in data sharing, and this is especially seen among social scientists. But sometimes we see quite constructive behavior. This is particularly seen in microbiologists that tend to share their data upon request more commonly than other groups, although their data initially was not as commonly available as for other disciplines. And here in the bottom figure, you can see that how those responses to data requests were divided across 7 disciplines in which we attempted to contact the authors. The arguments for declining data sharing and also various concerns of authors varied strongly and varied also across disciplines. When we asked the authors whether they have any concerns when they share their data, we got no response in most cases, which is good in this particular sense. Quite a number of authors asked about the purpose of our approach, which is also fine. When we asked the authors why they specifically declined to share the data when they did so, then loss of data and no time to search were the two main reasons. Also, data protection and data privacy were quite common, and these were especially common among psychologists. All other reasons were less commonly responded. And also, we received a positive result to our fourth hypothesis. So there is indeed a best before effect for upon request data availability. And we calculated that in each year, the data is 6% less likely to be available upon request compared to a more recent year. Another study by another team found that altogether 17% is the data decay rate. And below here, you can see these exponential curves. To conclude, data availability depends on journal and also the scientific discipline. We also expect that in lower ranking journals, data availability is a much more critical issue than in Science and Nature. When we compare to previous studies, we saw that those altogether the data availability was at 70% when we focused on full data, and this exceeded that of a vast majority of previous studies for other journals. In most disciplines, data availability increased in the recent years, especially in the second half of the last period. We conclude that data availability upon request should be avoided as a statement. And based on analysis of these statements, it seems that some researchers seem to think that they can get away from sharing the data when stating availability upon reasonable request. So what is reasonable request? Maybe our request was not reasonable, who knows? Data availability decays with time, especially for the unshared data, because of data loss and exceedingly longer time needed to search for old data. Data sharing issues should be urgently managed, also to be able to save old data. What are the ways forward? Well, we all seem to agree that availability of research data should be encouraged in many ways. This can be done by providing specific extra funds by grant agencies. Journals can offer open science badges to motivate researchers. Also, increasing citation numbers might contribute to more data sharing. Another recent option are citable data papers. So researchers can double their impacts by preparing both the data paper and a case study, although it generates maybe too many articles, and also there's a concern of double or multiple publication of the same data. Accounting for data availability in grant or job applications, and also indication of available or shared data in researchers' ORCID, researcher ID, and Google Scholar profiles. Of course, there should be exceptions, such as very sensitive topics, and also some kind of embargo periods could be reasonable for theses, so that students can defend their thesis without being afraid that somebody will use their data before they can finalize their papers. Also, data sharing enforcement may be necessary. Maybe the best way is to include data sharing in contracts with the host institutions. But there are also more radical ways, such as managing grant extensions and new applications by grant agencies. There could be specific data editors in journals, but this adds to costs, certainly. And as most radical opportunity, there could be editorial withdrawal of the article if the data sharing has been violated. To make those data sharing statements and links to data more straightforward, there might be QR codes in use. Surprisingly, I haven't seen it in publications or journals so far. So with this, I conclude. I warmly thank my co-authors who were involved in generating the pre-analysis model of the study, and also who strongly participated in all steps of the data paper preparation. That is the basis of my talk. So thank you very much.
Rebecca, did you want to say anything else about Lihu's presentation?
Sure. I hope everyone could hear and see that okay. So Lihu recorded that for us for this session. He couldn't attend, but he held a seminar in his university to record that for us, which I attended. So I think the first question that I had for him was like, did you not contact the journal editorial to ask for help accessing these data sets? Because like representing a publisher, that's the first thing I would have suggested. And he said they hadn't. Firstly, because it kind of wasn't part of their methodology, so they just wanted to ask and see what happened, but also they didn't want to get these authors in trouble, so they didn't want to start contacting journal editorial and then maybe triggering something to happen on the journal side, because they were doing like quite a big analysis of a lot of different papers. If anyone did have follow-up questions for Lihu, he would be really happy to take them, so I'll share his email address in the chat.
Okay, so we have had a presentation from a funding agency, from Aki. We've had a presentation from a researcher, meta-researcher, Lihu Tidasu, I think giving us lots of evidence about some of the challenges. And now we're going to move on to our third presentation from a different stakeholder, from what I might call an infrastructure provider, but our speaker can perhaps correct my characterization if they wish. But we're now pleased to introduce Rachel Lamy, Head of Special Programs at Crossref, who will be talking about DAS and PID, Persistent Identifier Integration, what, why, and how. And I think, Rachel, you're going to be sharing from your screen.
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Okay, let me see if I can get the... Okay, is the screen sharing working? If you give me a thumbs up.
It's not so far.
I've also put a link to my slides in the chat by way of a backup.
Is that the Zoom chat or the Wova chat?
Oh, sorry, in the shared document.
Got it. I can share from my screen if that.
Do you want to do
that?
it looks like it's doing. It looks like it's doing all of the right things to share, and then not. It might be a permissions thing, but if you're able to, then that fixes that. Thanks, Dimitri.
Yep. Although now I have the chat window is obscuring the thing I need to to share screen. Okay, here we go. Screen 2. Can you see that now?
Yes, I can. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. That. Okay, I can drive the slide.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. So yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, and thank you for the invitation to speak at the session today. Said I'm sort of coming with a couple of hats on. So I'm heading up product at Crossref, and I'm also the co-chair of the Scholix working group, who are running a session tomorrow morning. And I think sort of both are relevant to the conversations here. I think from my perspective, you know, the discussions around sort of quantity versus quality are really relevant, and hopefully I'll touch on some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of, you know, how that can kind of be improved or shored up over time. Next slide, please. So we are, as Crossref had said, we're a member organisation, and we work with publishers, funders, institutions, preprint servers from all around the world, and those organizations, they pass metadata and identifiers to us when they're registering DOIs upon article publication, and that includes lots of useful and interesting information about the content. So things like the title, author, funder information, ORCID IDs, very important, Estelle, I'm sure you'll agree, but things like license information, references, and more. And over the past few years, we've been working with our colleagues at DataCite to really kind of encourage the fact that citations to data should be added to the metadata that's registered, and using identifiers for that data where possible. We know that DOIs won't be what people use all the time, so we want to support as many identifiers as we can. I think the important thing about this is that the metadata and that information doesn't just stop at Crossref. So once we have information on article data links, then we share those out so that anyone can find them and use them in order to support their work. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about kind of how the flow of information works. So if I add links to data into the metadata that I send to or register with Crossref, then what we do is we look at that, we find any references or any other links that contain DataCite DOIs. And we supplement that with links between data and articles that data sites send in to us as well. And then we take that and we transform it into Scholix format. So you can access it via our event data API or via our Scholix API endpoint. And I'll explain in more detail what Scholix is in the next slide. But I think the point really is that we do more with the citation information that we get than just kind of let it sit there. It's important for us to be able to place that sort of filter on it and be able to pass it through. We get lots of, I've seen lots of questions about what Scholix is and how people can do Scholix and if people can join Scholix. And I think the kind of simplest way to explain it is that Scholix it's a framework or it's a standard way to exchange information between infrastructure providers. So it's a standard model to exchange information on the links between articles and data sets. And we also make recommendations and a provision for exchange formats and protocols, so ways to exchange that information. So, again, this is to try to, stay in keeping with the FAIR data principles. And it doesn't make sense for, everyone who's interested in article data links to be trying to exchange those or share those in slightly different formats. That just doesn't scale. So sort of congregating or agreeing on a standard to do this makes a lot of sense based on the volume of information that we are and want to be working with in future. Next slide. So for those of you who aren't really familiar with the Scholix schema, the simplest way that I tend to look at it is that it's a link between a source object. So maybe that's a Crossref DOI, and it links to a target object. So maybe a data site DOI that's been registered for a data set. And then there's a way to describe the information that exists between those things. So you can go as much into the detail as you like, but the point about sort of using identifiers in this context is because all of that related information is connected to the identifier, then you're able to kind of jump from that identifier into the details of, who created the data set, when it was deposited, any changes to that over time, rather than kind of replicate all of that information in another place. Again, that doesn't make sense. Next slide. And I think it's important to say that that the links that we are the links between Crossref and DOIs that DOIs and data site DOIs that we're seeing from Crossref members is growing over time. So it's never as easy as assuming that a link between a Crossref DOI and a data site DOI means it's an article data link. Obviously, data site register DOIs for lots of different items, including things like software, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, preprints, etc. And we try to do some filtering on that. But you can see that it's certainly from some organizations here, grouped by prefix, you can see that we're seeing a healthy volume of links between data and articles coming in over time, and this is continuing to grow. Next slide, please. So I thought it was worth just giving a really quick update on Scholix just before I jump into, how we would see this kind of relating to data availability statements. Said the group is in maintenance mode, but we still meet regularly, and it's co-chaired by DataCite, Crossref, OpenAir, and Elsevier. And we're currently discussing if, how, why to expand Scholar schema to support software citation. So as I said, we'll be talking about that a bit tomorrow. But again, I think I just wanted to communicate that the group is sort of a going concern, and we're still, you know, having these conversations and talking about adoption. So as with, you know, as with some of the work described here, you know, we understand that what's happening is very much kind of a work in progress. Next slide. So from the Crossref perspective, we are this screenshot you can see is from my colleague Patricia Feeney, who's our head of metadata. She's this is her sort of metadata development roadmap, and she's got a specific section on it where she's going to do research and planning about collecting data availability statements in the Crossref metadata. From our perspective, we're not expecting that we would have, you know, a DOI or an identifier for the DAS, but we'd recommend, and a lot of publishers are already doing this, including links to the data featured in the DAS, ideally including identifiers in the metadata that publishers.
Rachel, we've lost your sound. Not sure of the cause. Know if anyone else can indicate their status.
Yeah, is any?
Yeah.
Oh, you're back.
Oh.
You're back.
Excellent. I unplugged my headphones and plugged them in again, which shows technical competence now.
Okay. Well, I interrupted you pretty much as soon as it cut out, so pick up where you left off.
Okay, cool. As I said, we recommend, and I think the simplest way is that can explain it is that we'd encourage organizations who are working with data availability statements, so our publisher members, to include identifiers in the metadata that they send to Crossref. So again, I think this is the even without us accepting data availability statements as a specific section in the schema, publishers can still send us that in their Crossref metadata. And again, I think that sort of speaks to the quality over quantity thing, because this information needs to be machine readable for it to be shared downstream in the ways that I've described. If you, as before, if you add those article to data links in the Crossref metadata, then we will identify those, exchange them with DataCite, and make them available via our Scholix endpoint for use by by anyone who's interested in doing so. Again, that link is openly available. This is all open information. You don't need to have a subscription or anything to do that. Next slide. And just a really quick example from this eLife article, just to show that this is already happening. So in the statement about the availability of the data for this paper about fruit flies, you can see that they've made reference to the data, and there's also a link to the data where it sits in the Dryad digital repository. Next slide. It means that information is, because that information is registered in the Crossref metadata, then we can pass that downstream. So, for example, by passing this to DataCite, they're able to surface that citation in DataCite Commons along with other information on the data set that's registered with them. So again, it means that you can, as the researcher, they can start to see that they can start to see that usage and links between their data and the articles. Next slide. And I think just to show that this sort of on the metadata side of things, it said, so I can see a link to the data in the Crossref metadata, including that link to the DOI. Again, I know the screen's quite small, but also in event data, I can see the eLife, the journal article URL, and the link to the Dryad data set. So we've identified that, we've done the filtering, and we've made it available in a specific format. So being able to provide the identifiers and link to the data means that everything sort of works in the way it should downstream. So I think my last slide is just with a couple of takeaways. Link to other outputs using identifiers where possible. I feel like you'll hear that a lot this week. We'll help with the standardization and the dissemination of that information, and we'll improve DAS support in future via community consultation. So we'll share that once Patricia's ready to kind of share her research on that and get community feedback. And that'll probably come through via our blog. But yeah, thank you. Apologies for the slight sound hiccups, but happy to take any questions either now or later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I know that we don't have much time left and had another section to our session. I can see we've got one hand raised. Dimitri, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question quickly.
Thank you for the presentation. One thing I wonder, okay, but it would be just slower. Do you hear me all right with this microphone?
Just about. If you could try and speak loudly.
Because we did implement in our repository data from event data. Many researchers were pretty enthusiastic to the idea, but we actually don't really see an increase of citation of the data sets in the publication, meaning we don't get additional citations from event data because they don't cite the data in the publication. They do it the other way, but there haven't been such an increase since we added this metric.
Sorry, could you repeat the first little bit of your question?
Sorry, I said we.
Sorry, you're much clearer now.
Yeah, we implemented event data in our repository, and actually there haven't been much of an increase in the citation of the data within the publications. And just if you noticed similar situations in other implementations.
Oh, what I can do, Dimitri, we've done some. We've taken a bit of we've done some recent analysis on what we can see in terms of article data links in Crossref. I can share that with you so that you can see what's happening across other platforms. But equally, if you want to share your the prefix that you use to register your publications, we can have a look at that too.
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We will move on to the last section of the session. Rebecca, how would you like to proceed with the last section?
So I'll share my slides, and I think I had a lovely interactive session planned, but I don't think we really have time for that. So I thought it would still be useful just to use it as a little wrap up to what we've spoken about and then maybe take a couple of minutes for questions at the end. So I'll go through this quite quickly. I just think there's a couple of extra points that it would be useful to have in mind, considering reflecting on what the other speakers have said. You can see my screen? You can see my slides?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we've seen there are a number of issues around DAS, consistency, quality, machine readability to an extent, and I'll mention more about that. There was some criticism around data available on request statements, and also statements that say things like data are in the manuscript. So altogether, this is kind of a quality issue. So it's making it difficult for readers to access the data. It makes it difficult for other stakeholders to track what's happening with data sharing. And it's a missed opportunity because authors are creating all of this information, but it's still not great quality. So I just wanted to flag a couple of initiatives that have looked at how we can kind of format data availability statements in a way that's a bit more useful. So the first one is part of the journal archiving and interchange tag library. So it's an XML standard for tagging information in a research article. They do provide tags that let the publisher tag different parts of a data availability statement to make them machine readable. So just very, very quickly to show you. So this is an example that they give for a data set where the data availability statement is saying the data can't be made public. So you can see they're tagging things like an external link out to some guidelines and ethical restrictions. They're tagging things like the email address of the person you should contact for access. They have examples for supplementary files, so tagging the table that's in the manuscript. And then a few examples for repositories. So you can see in this example, they're saying Figshare is the source. And then the other one I wanted to point to is the Belmont Forum data accessibility statement and policy. So this is a bit different. It's more about what a human should add to their data availability statement. So saying it should do things like confirm that the data exists, include persistent identifiers, but it's not covering non-digital data, so data that can't be digitized or isn't digital, or data made available on request. But actually, if you look at various studies, so this is one that Ian was a co-author on, you can see that actually those DAS that aren't linking to data in repositories are the most common type. So on BMC journals in this study, it was data available on request DAS types. At PLOS, it was data being shared in SI. So I had a lovely interactive session where we would look to see, well, what more would a person want to know? Like if you're looking at a DAS that says the data is in the repository or the data is available on request, what more could we ask people to add? Like, what are we missing here? What should we be prompting authors to do differently? And I think maybe if there's interest, we could think about doing this at the next plenary session, because it kind of felt like that's how the conversation might have been going. Like, we know that authors will continue to do this and not all publishers mandate data in repositories. So what could we do in the meantime to improve data availability statements? So I'll leave it there because, we've got a couple of minutes left for discussion, but I just wanted to flag the JATS and Belmont Forum resources in the context of data availability statement, quality, and also structure. So let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think that personally, I think we have a couple of options to continue the discussion. You mentioned the next plenary, which is always an option. I'm actually looking at the attendee register, and a number of people internationally have kindly put their contact information. Perhaps another option we have is to organize a specific session, a focus session, using our mailing list and the contact details here, and we could perhaps spend an hour or more on the collaborative exercise, because I think there's obviously a lot of interest in this problem, and some collective thinking that could be done on solutions that might get us to the kind of outcomes that we want. So that might be a possibility. What do you or anyone else think about the best way to continue this conversation?
I'd certainly be happy to run that exercise in another session. I think there was already ideas come up in the chat, and it's a shame not to have had that conversation at the end, because I think we redefined the problem, but we didn't get to discuss it really.
I think we also lost some people at the start who would probably like to be involved in this as well. So delaying when everyone's a bit fresher, I think perhaps would be good too. We don't have the time pressure. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, we have a few people volunteering their availability to take part in a follow-up session, and also to mention the meeting of funding agencies that I referenced right at the start, introducing the session, was one that was organized separately, or I was going to say offline, but that's not really correct in the Zoom day and age, but we have organized specific community activities outside of the context of plenaries, which have actually been really important for making progress on some of our deliverables in this group. Any comments or questions from anybody else online or in the room in Seoul? See a hand raised from Graham, Springer Nature. Go for it.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I just wanted to make one point. It's a really useful conversation around this, I found, but I really see like data available on request and data in manuscripts and these types of statements which aren't that useful, but like the behavioural context for them is that I think they're really the most straightforward option that an author can take just to get to publication. A lot of the time, that's the feature of them. And if we're looking at the DAS almost as like the symptom rather than the thing we're trying to fix, what we should really be trying to do is point authors more towards what actually the best practice is, which is getting data into repositories. And in that context, just sort of thinking about, should we like ban this statement or should we just get rid of it? You're likely just to push them down the next easiest path, I would say. So looking at it really in context of what's the best option that we want to get to and how can we most focus on that, I think is that's probably where we want to get to.
Thanks, Graham. Great point. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any other hands raised. Any comments you would like to make, Rebecca, Natasha, or Simon, in closing the session and deciding on next steps?
Just to reiterate, I think if there's even a small group who would like to come back together and work through some of these problems. I don't think I did a great job of articulating what some of the issues were in the time that I had, but I think there's a lot that we could do together. So I'd be happy to take that as an action for our group to try and set that up.
Also that we heard some depressing statements today in the DAS area, but that is reflective of the challenges in data sharing just generally and making data sharing the norm. So it's not isolated from that conversation. And I think that was reflected in some of the talks today as well. So that's our challenges. That's why we're here.
I'd just echo what Natasha said. That was exactly what was on my mind. I think having some of the data and some of the reflective pieces today were really interesting, and I think that starts to talk about where the challenges for DAS lies ahead. So I found all the sessions really fascinating. So thanks to all the presenters.
Okay, so I think that likely wraps us up for another RDA plenary. Looks like we've still got a lot of work to do, but I'd say that was a nice problem to have. So wishing everybody a happy rest of their day, afternoon, morning, evening, and we'll be in touch with members of our group's mailing list about next steps, and hopefully with a bespoke session that we might organize, diving deeper into some of the solutions to the issues that we talked about today. So with that, I wish everybody a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.